Welcome to another transfer tips video ahead of Game Week 21. I'm going to be talking about the players we have to buy, hold, sell and also skip. So there's going to be plenty of options discussed here today for various reasons. So let's get straight into the video. We're going to start off with Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and Newcastle versus Everton has been suspended because Newcastle are pretty much down to the bare bones. They have not that many players available. Eddie Howe was also suggesting this yesterday as well, so it's not that much of a surprise. I actually took a punt and brought Calvert-Lewin in just in case, and luckily I have got Dennis off the bench to replace him, but in most cases a lot of people will be definitely kind of affected negatively because of this purchase. But I still think Calvert-Lewin is a good purchase in general. The problem really is he is coming back from 2 injuries, and Rafa Benitez himself did say that he's going to be managing and trying to make sure they don't overdo it, because they have to be very careful, otherwise there could be a risk of another injury. Calvert-Lewin had a very good start to the season. In the first 3 games he scored 3 goals, and if you look at the stats as well, 11 shots in the box, 2.98 XG, even the XA was pretty decent, 4 big chances and 3 key passes, but across the board in just 3 appearances these numbers are very good. But the main appeal really is the fixtures. You look at the next 5 and they are fantastic. I mean, Norwich, for example, is marked grey, as you see on screen, but that's really a blue fixture. They're one of the worst teams in the league. And yep, that's just a lot of great fixtures for Calvert-Lewin, and I think he could do very well. Similar to Damari Gray, he's another one I would recommend. But I look at the other Everton assets like the defenders and Pickford, I'm still not convinced by them right now. If they start to show a bit more improvement defensively, then you can consider their assets as well. But right now, Gray and Calvert-Lewin are the main ones, and I think Calvert-Lewin is the standout. On top of that, Everton have 3 games that are yet to be rescheduled, and they're all good on paper. We have Leicester at home, and yes, they did beat Liverpool, and they might be tough from time to time, but I still think Everton can do pretty well and score a few goals against Leicester, who typically are pretty poor defensively. And the other 2 fixtures, there's no doubt about it, Burnley away and Newcastle at home, those are really good fixtures from an offensive point of view. Everton may not keep clean sheets in those fixtures, but they can definitely score a lot of goals. And Calvert-Lewin should start to slowly build up his fitness again. And so long as he avoids injury, I think he's a great option. Up until you could say 27, then the fixtures kind of turn a little bit. And they face Man City, Tottenham, Wolves, Watford, West Ham, Man United. And the kind of fixtures keep on continuing. Palace, Liverpool and Chelsea. So really around Game Week 27 to 35, that's when the fixtures look really bad. But depending on when the doubles are kind of scheduled to take place, then that means Calvert-Lewin, for that foreseeable future, he could be a great option. And I still would consider him, especially if you're in the market for a striker. And there's so many to choose from. Watkins, Calvert-Lewin, and a few others. I mean, Ronaldo, if you want a premium. Harry Kane is now getting back into the mix. And now let's actually talk about the next striker. Speaking of Harry Kane, he is improving. I wouldn't say he's back to his best just yet, but very unlucky not to score a brace against Southampton. That goal was wrongfully disallowed. I think he was onside. And his stats are pretty decent across the whole season. He's just not really been at it. And now under Conte, there's no doubt over the last 3 or 4 games, he's looking very, very impressive. And if you actually look at the stats from the last 3 game weeks, they are actually pretty frightening. From Game Week 17 to 20, Harry Kane in 3 games has scored 3 goals, a bit similar to Calvert-Lewin, 11 shots in the box, also very similar, 2.64 XG, and his XA is 1.19, and he's had 5 big chances, 2 big chances created, and 4 key passes, 12 shots overall, and 5 on target. So Kane has definitely improved. He's got some good fixtures coming up, and Spurs still have 3 games that are yet to be rescheduled. So it's looking really good for Harry Kane and Heung-min Son. I think a double up is once again very profitable. They were a bit lucky, maybe you could say, on the other hand, because Salisu's red card changed the game completely. Before that, Spurs weren't really getting into it, and maybe Kane and Son wouldn't have produced if Southampton still had 11 men. But at the same time, different factors come into play, and Southampton, after going 1 man down, they just sat back and they were able to defend very resolutely, and maybe they wouldn't have done the same if they had 11 men on the pitch. So Harry Kane for me is a really good option. His stats across the board are very good, as I talked about before, and over the season, 11 big chances. It's not the greatest figure in the world, but still good. Over 7 XG, over 4 XA. So there's definitely an underperformance in both metrics, and you would expect that to balance out maybe over the next few game weeks, especially with his good form. So Harry Kane and Heung-min Son are both great options. Who would I prefer? I still prefer Heung-min Son, but Harry Kane is definitely someone else worth considering. And now the question is, do you go for Harry Kane or Cristiano Ronaldo? Now let's see how Man United do against Burnley if that game isn't called off, but Harry Kane in recent weeks has definitely looked better. I would say that he also plays in a better team as things stand. With Ronaldo though, You just never know. I think he's very explosive, but at the same time, there's going to be a lot of blanks, and I think he's only got one open play goal in the last 12 appearances. So right now, Harry Kane does look like the better option, but I'm not necessarily that sure if it's as clear-cut as it's made out to be right now. But Harry Kane, for me, is definitely a purchase. The same goes for Calvert-Lewin. We're showing a lot of love to strikers right now, and Ollie Watkins, another one that I mentioned before. I talked about him in recent videos as well as being a buy. I still think he is, despite the fact that he's just had some games cancelled and postponed, so we haven't been able to see the best of him. Steven Gerrard does have COVID, and I would just keep an eye on the Aston Villa COVID situation. I think it shouldn't be too bad, but you never know. And the same goes for any of these players that we discuss. But Ollie Watkins, if you're looking for someone around 7 million, there's Antonio, there's Calvert-Lewin, and there's Watkins. And right now, you'd argue that Watkins is probably the best of the three. He's got some good fixtures coming up. He's got some decent ones to be rescheduled yet. And 5 goals and 2 assists in 16 appearances. And most of them have come pretty much under Steven Gerrard. 34 shots, 16 on target, 31 shots in the box. His XG is 5.59, so not as good as Harry Kane, for example. 8 big chances, but we also have to take into account the gulf in the price difference between Harry Kane and Ollie Watkins. And even then, Watkins has been better this season, but still a really good option. The fixtures that are yet to be rescheduled for Aston Villa are Burnley at home and Leeds away. And with Spurs, of course, I talked about those 3 fixtures. Burnley away, Brighton away, and Leicester away. So all of these players that I talked about in the buy section, they all have some very good fixtures that are yet to be rescheduled. So if you look at the kind of fixtures right now as things stand, they might not look too promising in some cases. But with those fixtures also coupled in, you will probably see a vast improvement, and it also increases their appeal as FPL assets. So right now, strikers are looking pretty good, and we have plenty of options, to be honest, especially with Antonio now getting some returns once again. Then you have the budget strikers like Dennis, King and Broja. And I know I talked about him a few weeks ago in Ollie Watkins, but because of all the postponements, a lot of people have sold him, and I can understand that. But I still think he's a buy. And if you still have Watkins, he's definitely worth holding. But in most cases, I think Watkins is a buy. Another striker, but this time went on to the hold section. Now, the thing with Dennis, and I say hold very lightly, is because he is probably going to the African Cup of Nations, but Claudio Ranieri said in his press conference that there is a chance that he could actually stay with Watford and not go because Nigeria didn't really comply with the window that was needed. So they were kind of a bit late in kind of calling up Emmanuel Dennis. So there is still a chance, although very slim, that Dennis will not go with Nigeria to the African Cup of Nations. And to be honest, I think he'd want to go, but honestly, he's a hold for the Tottenham game. I know a lot of people will probably be selling him ahead of that fixture. I would definitely keep him for that. Then, if we get news of him definitely going to the African Cup of Nations, which, to be honest, is the likely scenario, then he's a sell in Game Week 22. But right now, ahead of Game Week 21, Dennis is a keep. And let's say, for example, that the unthinkable happens and Dennis stays with Watford, then he's definitely a keep up until the rest of the season, you could say. And once again, another goal against West Ham. This guy, he's just so good for Watford. He's probably their best player. 8 goals and 6 assists. Those are some really good numbers for someone around 5 million. He's definitely not going to be 5 million next season if he stays in the Premier League, but really good stats across the board, at least for someone around his price. If you compare these stats, for example, to Watkins or even Joshua King, they're not really anything special. His XG is pretty unsustainable, you could say, but guess what? He's a good finisher and he doesn't need too many chances. And I think if he does stay and he doesn't go to the African Cup of Nations, he's definitely worth holding for the foreseeable future, but definitely keep him for that Tottenham fixture. Another player that is a hold for the time being is Tino Livramento. Now you may ask why, because he hasn't produced a return since Game Week 11, and also he is marked as an injury doubt, but Ralph Hasenhüttl did allude to the fact that the injury isn't too serious. And another thing that he kind of let slip by in an interview is that the Brentford home fixture for Southampton could actually be rescheduled to Game Week 21. So he could have a double game week facing Newcastle and Brentford at home. And the same would obviously apply to Armando Broja. He's another one that you could actually keep. And to be honest, if I were to pick between the two, I'd rather have Broja. But Livramento is more of a sell for most people. A lot of people have already got rid of him. And I think he may be worth keeping. Now, after that, yes, you could just sell him. But for Game Week 21, just hold your horses, wait until the deadline for as much information as possible. If Livramento is fit, and if they do have that double game week, I think he is an easy keep. And you could even start him over the likes of Reece James, for example. His stats across the season aren't anything special, and there was one point, I think, from Game Week 4 to Game Week 11, where he was pretty much producing a return every single game week, and it was a bit similar to Lundstrom, but unfortunately he hasn't been able to continue that, and he's been very poor since then, and of course he did miss out against Spurs in Game Week 20, but if the double game week does happen in 21, and if Livramento is fit, he is definitely worth keeping, and Broja even more so. I think he's a great option for this double game week potentially if it does happen. The last hold of this video is James Maddison. I still don't trust Leicester, and if you look at Maddison's stats, they're nothing special, but over the next 3 game weeks, some very good fixtures there for the Foxes. Norwich at home, Burnley away, and Brighton at home, and there's still 2 fixtures that need to be rescheduled for Leicester City, and they include Tottenham at home and Everton away. So if you look at it, Maddison is worth keeping, maybe over the next month or so. After that, that's when you could look to sell, and I do think there may be better options like Jarrod Bowen around a similar price, but if you do have him, then keep him. Would I be looking to buy him in right now? Probably not, because there are still many to choose from, around 5 to 7 million, and then if you look even further, there's just so many choices like Heung-min Son. So ultimately, Maddison is a hold. He's a very streaky player. I don't really expect him to be a long-term option that we can still consider in February, March and April, but let's wait and see. You never know, but he also did this last season where he had a very good December, and then after that he kind of tailed off. So hopefully he can continue this vein of form, but I'm still not convinced. Despite all these reservations, he's definitely worth keeping over the next few game weeks, and if he has some doubles along the way, then it will just be even better for those who do own Maddison. We're now on the sell section, and Mohamed Salah being a sell. I mean, it just sounds crazy, doesn't it? Now, you can keep him for the Chelsea game, then just sell him in Game Week 22 when he goes off to the African Cup of Nations. But still, if we're being completely honest, I don't really think you'd miss out on too much if you do sell him against Chelsea. Could be famous last words. And maybe the penalty miss against Leicester has kind of changed a lot of perceptions around him. But you know, it's just 2 bad games from him in a row, and it doesn't really happen too often, and that's his first penalty miss in the Premier League since 2017. His stats across the board are ridiculous. I mean, look at that. Over 14 XG. It's just almost double anyone else that we've talked about today, including Harry Kane. I mean, these stats are absolutely sensational. 15 goals and 10 assists in 19 appearances, and Liverpool are going to miss him big time. The same goes for the other African players in their squad. But yeah, I just think he's a sell because he's potentially going to miss 3 game weeks after the Chelsea game, and that includes Brentford at home, Palace away, and Leicester at home. If it wasn't for the African Cup of Nations, then Salah would never even be in the discussion for holding, buying, selling, or whatever, because we just know you should just have him and that's it. But because of these factors, and you can also do a lot of that money, maybe get Ronaldo, Harry Kane, Heung-min Son, or at least maybe even 2 of them and spread the funds around, then that just means Salah is a sell. It's up to you whether you do it now or next week. I'm actually considering doing a move to Heung-min Son in Game Week 21. I don't think it's absolutely necessary though, and even though he's going to be highly captained as always against Chelsea, I just don't really think his ceiling is as high, at least on paper, as it was maybe even against Leicester. But having said that, Salah's fixture proof. He can still damage your rank and do very well if you do decide to sell him this week. But ultimately, whether it's this week or next week, Salah's a sell, so it's up to you when you decide to do so. Another player that I didn't really think about selling, at least in the last month or two, is Reece James, but very poor returns. He might do very well against Brighton tonight, but then it's Liverpool, Man City and Tottenham over the next 3. And honestly, if we're looking at Reece James, the stats are good across the season. He's very explosive. He had that kind of 5-6 game week period where he was absolutely ridiculous, and I think at one point he got over 50 points in the space of 4 to 5 game weeks, which is absolutely insane. But if you do have Marcos Alonso or Antonio Rudiger, you could keep one of them and sell Reece James. But ultimately, all these Chelsea assets, you want to get off at one point because they're going to have those blanks in game week 24 and 25. That's why you can see here that you can only see 3 fixtures instead of the next 5 as we typically see with these players. So there's going to be some blanks for Chelsea, and ultimately that's also another reason why I think Reece James is a sell. And to be honest, if there wasn't so many postponements and all of that, I probably would have sold Reece James already, or the other Chelsea players I have like Marcos Alonso. Now, you can still keep one Chelsea defender and they can be pretty good, but ultimately you want to get off them, and by game week 24-25 you want to ideally get off all Chelsea players. So for me, Reece James is a sell, and the same goes for pretty much any Chelsea player. Marcos Alonso around game week 27 you could say, or 26, he could be someone worth considering, to be honest, because Ben Chilwell is out for the rest of the season and Marcos Alonso is a bit cheaper than Reece James and Antonio Rudiger. But right now, over the next 5 game weeks, I think any Chelsea player, including Reece James, is a sell. Another player with plenty of blanks is Bukayo Saka. So he obviously blanked here against Wolves in game week 20, and he's going to blank in game weeks 25 and 27. Now, Arsenal do have some double game weeks to be rearranged, and the same goes for Chelsea, but their double game weeks are probably going to be very tough if we're being honest. But with Bukayo Saka, he's been very good. I mean, that haul against Norwich was incredible, to be honest, and his stats across the season are very good, very similar XG and XA numbers, 33 shots inside the box, 41 shots on target. So Saka is definitely stepping up the goal threat compared to last season. The same goes for Smith Rowe. But any of these Arsenal assets, especially in the midfield, when you have others popping about, like James Maddison, you've got Rafinha if he does stay at Leeds, and many more. Conor Gallagher when he returns from COVID, Jarrod Bowen. I mean, the list is endless. I just think Bukayo Saka is a sell, despite how good he's been, because he's facing Man City at home, Tottenham away, Burnley at home is a pretty good fixture, and Wolves away. But then you look at the blanks afterwards, that also puts me off. And yes, there might be some nice double game weeks to come, but at the same time, I don't think Arsenal's doubles would necessarily be that good. And we talked about this in previous streams and also in the chip strategy video recently. The games that are yet to be rescheduled are Chelsea away, Wolves at home and Liverpool at home. So they aren't really the greatest fixtures. And you look at the fixtures that are already tough that Arsenal do have for sure, it's just not really going to combine that well and make Arsenal assets that appealing. So for me, despite how good Bukayo Saka and the other Arsenal attackers have been, they're all sells for me. We're in the final section of this video and we're in the skip section. Now, I talked about Reece James being a sell, and the same goes for any Chelsea players you do have, whether you sell them now or maybe next week. It's up to you. But the same goes for those players like Mason Mount and Romelu Lukaku, who you might be very tempted by. You look at the next three fixtures, Liverpool, Man City and Tottenham, they're pretty tough. Then two blanks following that. There could be a double game week for Chelsea. They still have two games that are yet to be rescheduled against Arsenal and Brighton. But ultimately, is it really worth having Romelu Lukaku and all these players, or at least bringing them in right now when you'd probably want to sell them in a few weeks' time? I don't think so. Now, it's a different story if we're talking about game week 26 onwards, because their run of fixtures up until game week 33 is spectacular. That's when Chelsea players like Lukaku would be buys, in my opinion, depending on the circumstances as well. But right now, I just think avoid and skip all these players like Romelu Lukaku, Mason Mount, and anyone else that you may be intrigued by, even Marcos Alonso following the news of Ben Chilwell. So Romelu Lukaku, as much as he looked very impressive against Aston Villa, as much as I expect him to do pretty well against Brighton if he gets the minutes tonight, I think he's a skip. This may seem like a bit of an obvious one, but people are still bringing in Riyad Mahrez. Now, I think right now he is the best Man City midfielder, but he's going to the African Cup of Nations. Algeria are the reigning champions, so I just don't really see any need to go for him right now. And regardless, City, it's just a minefield in terms of like who's going to start, who's going to be on the bench, who's going to play 60 minutes in one game, who's going to be taken off, and all of that. But regardless, despite how good Riyad Mahrez has been in the last 3 game weeks, that's 3 double-digit returns in a row. It's just absolutely insane. I would still avoid him and skip. The same goes for Lukaku and one more name that we're going to talk about later. If you look at the stats, they're pretty good, and Mahrez is City's top goal scorer this season. The stats are good across the board with 31 shots, 11 on target, 20 in the box, and you have to bear in mind how many minutes Mahrez has played compared to the others that we have discussed today. So I think these stats are quite impressive considering that 6 big chances, 5 big chances created, and his XG and XA figures are quite similar. So if you compare these stats to Saka, for example, and I know there's quite a big price difference as well, if you also compare the minutes, Mahrez has actually got better stats per 90 compared to Bukayo Saka and many others on this list. But regardless of how good the fixtures are in the long term for City and all of that, just ignore them. And even if it's just for one game week, I know he's playing Arsenal and Mahrez can do very well in that fixture. I wouldn't go for him and just skip him and maybe get him back in when the African Cup of Nations is over. The final name that we're talking about today is Lucas Moura. Now, I actually maybe bought a bit into the hype yesterday during the deadline stream, which is a mistake of mine, because throughout the last few weeks, despite Lucas's very good performances, I've been very apprehensive about Lucas, and I've told people maybe just, don't go for him. Now, one benching doesn't mean he's a bad option, but I'm looking at Spurs' assets. You've got Hugo Lloris, who you can get in goal, Reguilon in defence, Son, and now Harry Kane is becoming an option. And if you want to triple up on Spurs, I would go for 3 of those 4 names I mentioned. Lucas is still a really good choice, around 6.5 million, and he can still do a really good job for you. But then you compare him to Jarrod Bowen, I would rather have him. And then there's so many different options that we talked about in this very video, around 5 to 7 million. So I just don't really think you have to have Lucas Moura. And if you look across the season, his stats and his goal output is still quite inconsistent. He can be very explosive from time to time, and he's still a decent choice. So you don't have to completely skip him if you really believe in him. But for me, there's better options in Spurs. There's also better options around his price in the midfield. and to be honest, despite his really good performances recently, I think he's a skip. Well, there you have it. We've talked about 3 players for each of these sections, so 12 players in total. Let me know, do you like this new skip section? Do you want me to skip the skip section? I'm curious to see your feedback and ideas, but thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, smash the like button and subscribe if you're new around here. Every subscription is much appreciated. We're trying to get to 9,000. You can also join the Discord server. The link is in the description below, and also my Twitter and Instagram, Dylan_RCM. And good luck with Game Week 21, and good luck with the rest of the season. This Christmas period has been hectic, but it will calm down now after New Year's, which is maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing, depending on your kind of form right now. But let's wait and see what the rest of Game Week 20 has in store for us. And do you agree with these picks, by the way? Do you disagree? And which players would you also include in all of these sections? Let me know. I'll be reading all the comments as always. And just enjoy the football. That's the most important thing. And I'll see you next time.